Coming up on Sunday Nation is Martin Luther King Jr. holiday and the King holiday tomorrow, Monday, January 16th. We're talking to Rabbi Daniel Syme, a transcendent leader and one of the leading rabbis in North America, about an award he's receiving, a Martin Luther King Jr. award from the Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson in Detroit tomorrow on King Day. And of course, also we have Jerry Brisson, who is the head of Gleaners Food Bank here in the region, talking to us about who is hungry, the state of food insecurity across the region, and of course, where we are in the nation. We also have an inspirational story. Maurice Fagans just graduated with a degree in general studies at the age of 82 years old. You'll hear from him directly why he decided to take this long journey towards a degree in general studies at the age of 82. And then my reflection, I'll read to you words from the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. From his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, one of the most consequential books ever written about our democratic experiment. All coming up to you today on Sunday Nation. Stay with us, and Bankole Thompson. All right, welcome back to Sunday Nation. On Monday, Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, Rabbi Daniel Syme, Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Beth, the oldest Jewish congregation in Michigan and one of the leading rabbis in North America, who was inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers at Morehouse College, will be honored by the Reverend Jesse Jackson in Detroit with the Martin Luther King Jr. Let Freedom Ring Award. Here to talk to us, of course, about this honor is the Rabbi Daniel Syme himself. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bankole. It's good to see you.
You know, and I brought this book. This is Dr. King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? This is his last testament. I'm gonna get into that in a minute, but you're going to be honored tomorrow by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, our civil rights leader, with the Martin Luther King Jr. Let Freedom Ring Award. I want to talk about that in the context of the work that you've been doing in the area of civil rights, Black-Jewish relations, and so forth. But first, your reaction to the honor itself.
Well, it's a very humbling experience. I am no latecomer to the civil rights movement. I began to embrace civil rights when I was 9 years old. Our family moved to Detroit, and I discovered that Reverend C.L. Franklin had tape recordings of his Sunday services on Sunday night. So when my parents thought I was asleep, I snuck a transistor radio into my bedroom and listened to Reverend Franklin, and of course his daughter Aretha Franklin, who's a soloist in the choir, and I was hooked. My father marched with Dr. King in 1963. He came home and he said, "Danny, I thought I was marching for blacks, but I was really marching for you and for your brother and for generations yet to come." And so from an early age, I was enfolded in the spirit and the mission of the civil rights movement. When I was a junior at the University of Michigan, my dad came home one day and said, Dr. Charles Adams would like to know if you would like to speak at Hartford Memorial Baptist Church. I said, what's the catch? I mean, it was something, it's a great church. And I called Dr. Adams, we had a nice talk, and he said to me, Danny, you know that speaking in the black church is different from speaking in a synagogue. I said, Dr. Adams, let me stop you. The sermon that I will deliver at Hartford Memorial has been written since I was 9 years old. I've just been looking for a place to deliver it. So my friendship with Charles developed after that. And then when I came back to Detroit from New York City, where I was for 25 years, to Temple Beth, Pastor Kenneth Flowers And then you entered my life, and we became close and good friends.
As you laid out the sweep of your life, your biography, at every chapter, every center has been civil rights. How important is it, though, in the context of a black-Jewish relation here, to be able to ensure that that becomes the connecting bond between the African-American community and the Jewish community?
It's a bond we have to have in America, especially today.
Yeah.
The fact that I've been involved over the years has given me a certain currency
Yeah.
to involve myself in those enterprises without being thought of as opportunistic, etc.,
Yeah.
either by my Jewish colleagues or black colleagues.
Yes.
And you've taught me a whole lot about that, Bankole, because you were one of the first to reach out and say, let's do an event with the black and Jewish communities, and we did it at Bethel.
Yes, at Temple Beth. Yes, I remember.
And not too long after that, Coretta Scott King came to speak at Bethel. It was one of the most frightening nights of my life.
So I want to talk about that. Having Coretta Scott King at Temple Bethel when you were the leader of Temple Bethel, what that means for you, and how important was that visit to the national and long-standing push for a black-Jewish relation?
Ken Flowers is, in black church parlance,
Yeah.
the adopted son of Coretta Scott King. She oversaw his education at Morehouse College. Yeah. And he came to me one day and he said, Danny, would you like to have Coretta Scott King speak at Bethel? And I thought it was a great idea, fabulous idea. And it became one of the most frightening experiences of my life. Because as the date grew closer, I realized Dr. King had been assassinated. And we didn't have anything close to the security that as a young rabbi I thought we needed at Bethel. Mm-hmm. So I began looking all over Detroit for security, and we found the best. And I have to tell you honestly that as touched and moved as I was by Coretta's remarks that night, I was relieved when she pulled away from the temple safe in the
How was she received by your congregation?
Oh, it was standing room only.
Yeah.
She was just amazing, calm, serene, but passionate, and beautiful in her soul. And people hung on every word. I mean, really, so much so.
I mean, obviously that event became one of the landmark events for Temple Bethel in its history.
Definitely, definitely. I think the two events I hear the most about at Temple Bethel over the years, my dad was at Temple Israel, was when Eleanor Roosevelt came during World War II, and when Coretta Scott King came in the 1980s.
Yeah. I want to also talk about just your involvement in other aspects that overlap, that talk about the importance of the African-American Jewish relationship here. You've also been involved with Single Soul, which is a suicide prevention endeavor here. And you were recently honored by Black Family Development and so forth. Again, almost every chapter in your life has been reaching out to the African-American community here. Talk about that in the context, though, this time around, in terms of why perhaps we need to see more people willing to walk in your footstep in terms of bridging that gap now that is needed in a Black Jewish context.
There are 50 million people in America today who are in need of mental help. And we don't realize just how many of them are in different communities throughout our country.
Right.
One of the things that I found was that in the Black community, Black young people were reluctant to come out and say, I need help. But through the work of Black Family Development and Kenyatta Stevens, who is a powerhouse downtown, that help is now underway. I came to suicide prevention through the death of my own brother, Michael, who died by suicide when he was 21 years old, back in 1975. He was, you would have liked him. He was a great musician, never learned how to read music. He played guitar with John Lennon, flute with Frank Zappa. He was the lead guitarist for a black rock group out of Detroit called Chairman of the Board. But because my brother David is a concert pianist, Michael always wanted to play a classical instrument. So he borrowed a violin, taught himself how to play in a month, and won a 4-year scholarship to a music conservatory in the South. That was the level of his ability. But Michael got depressed. He didn't really like it there. He came back to Detroit. And I remember that day, I came in from New York. We went for a ride in the car, and I told him, Michael, I just want you to know how proud I am of you and how mature your leaving that empty environment is. And he said to me, Danny, I've never felt worse in my life, and I see no reason to go on this way. Well, this was 1975. Nobody spoke about suicide then. It was kind of like the word cancer.
Yeah.
You had to whisper it. So I knew he had seen his therapist that morning. I didn't immediately get help, and that night, coming home from services, I found that he had died. And of course, I felt enormous guilt and shame and a certainty that if I had gotten help for Michael right then, he would be alive today. And so from that day to this, I have worked in youth suicide prevention, and every time I save a life, it's as if, Bankole, I'm saving my brother's life. Now, when I worked in New York, I reached out to professional sports teams across the country. When I came to Detroit, I was introduced to Black Family Development. And I invited members of the Black Family Development staff to come to our suicide prevention trainings. They were wonderful. And they had their own program. And when we found director Stan Zimmerman out of New York, who had written the Gilmore Girls and the Golden Girls and even a few episodes of Roseanne, I said, let's produce his play that he had written on suicide of famous people who had died by suicide writing their last notes to their friends and family. He cast the show. We did it at Cast Tech. And it really was a profoundly moving experience.
Yeah. So the cross-pollination of ideas here with Black Family Development and Single Soul, we don't see much of that. Not that it doesn't exist, but I feel like this crossover partnership in the Black Jewish community is not as frequent as it should be.
Unfortunately, you're right. And we have to engender that sort of cooperation by any means possible. In order to do that, obviously, we have to have people of goodwill in the Black community and the Jewish community to reach out to one another in terms of nonprofit helping organizations to join forces and move forward together. Reverend Jackson has had that kind of outreach. You have had that kind of outreach. We just got to take it beyond the immediate purview of the cities in which we live now.
Yeah, very important. You said that, you know, I said I brought this book, Where Do We Go From Here? Dr. King's Last Final Testament. In fact, Dr. King marched with, you know, Rabbi Abraham Yahshua Harshel marched with Dr. King in Selma, But Dr. King also received the American Medallion Award from the American Jewish Committee. So he was in the throes of an emerging, earlier on, an emerging black Jewish coalition, because he understood the essence of building coalition, that we can't win battles on our own. We have to build coalitions and bridges. Do you feel that sometimes that history is missing or is ignored or is forgotten?
Yes. All we got to do is see where we are today. Coalitions of decency are very few and far between in America today. We're emphasizing conflict more than we are cooperation. And I've got to hope that somewhere in this country there are people, and I know they're there, who are willing to reach out to one another and say, let's do this in a different way. There's a coalition of black and Jewish clergy that meets once a month, clergy from all over the United States, to discuss the Torah, the Bible, together as colleagues. And they're now beginning to move in coalition to discuss Kanye West, his comments about anti-Semitism. And it's very encouraging to see the black community respond in the way that they have to the initial outreach of the Jewish community.
One of the towering symbol here in Detroit has been the late federal judge Damon Keith, who was widely respected and admired in the Jewish community as well, seen as a bridge in that space. And you have a very special recollection of him.
Oh, yes. Damon Keith was a very good friend of my father's. He was a frequent guest at our home when we lived on Glendale or on Birchcrest. And I was very fond of Damon Keith. He was a powerful force, short, but great in stature. And when he spoke, everyone listened.
Yeah.
So we had an opportunity to share commitments together. He probably did more work of a practical nature with my dad than he did with me, but I was fortunate enough to know him and to be able to be with him on numerous occasions.
To bring this all to full circle, what is your final advice for those who are listening and watching this interview in you making the compelling case for a black-Jewish relation that enhances these two communities? And especially on Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Yep. I would say we have one country, we have one world. We're not going to get another one. So we've got to do our best to see to it that the world in which we live lives up to its potential for goodness and caring and passion and democracy and hope. And Martin Luther King Day comes every year to remind us of that imperative. And I hope that as long as the breath of life is in me, I will have a small part in realizing that hope.
All right. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. One of North America's leading rabbis, the eminent Daniel B. Syme here. He'll be honored tomorrow by the Reverend Jesse Jackson in downtown Detroit with the Martin Luther King Jr.-led Freedom Ring Award for his decades of transcending work in the area of civil rights and building the important Black-Jewish coalition. We'll be right back.